Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing. Hi, and welcome to Influence to Death. My name is Victoria LaFont, and I am one of your co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Hannah Wright, your other co-host. Thank you as always for tuning in and listening to us. Today, we have our wonderful guest, Amanda Jones, on the podcast. She joined us before, so y'all might recognize her beautiful voice.
Yeah, she was here for Detox Part 1 and 2. Actually, Amanda, with the way that smut is on the rise, we will not have to go into my personal smut journey, but you might have a second career in reading smut novels like that.
Oh gosh, I've never thought of my voice as being smutty at all, but maybe I'll try to embody that some more.
Well, we have a pretty spicy topic today. It has nothing to do with Sarah J. Maas. It is hydrochloric acid. So Hannah, we have a whole conversation we have to have outside of this.
Okay, I think I missed something like completely. So
I'm totally infatuated with reading smut right now, as are like billions of women around the world, apparently. Anyway, totally different podcast. Well, maybe TMI. However, we touched on hydrochloric acid in our detox episodes with Amanda. And so she is back today. We are going to discuss all things hydrochloric acid. And if that word maybe kind of, you're like, oh, I've heard of that. It sounds familiar. It's commonly used as a digestive supplement in integrative health. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of a company. Some companies don't produce hydrochloric acid as a supplement, but like all of the big name supplement companies that I've used, Thorne, Designs for Health, Biotics, I almost said Fullscript, lots of places, supplement companies that are available on Fullscript, they offer a hydrochloric acid. So we're going to dig in and see like what's the full story of using hydrochloric acid as a supplement. So
yeah. So are we going to start with, you mentioned a bit about the history of hydrochloric acid,
Yeah, so we're going to follow our regular podcast format. We've been trying to stick with it. We've gone off the rails a little bit lately, but we're going to give you a little bit of the backstory, the history, our bias, which we all have clinical experience using hydrochloric acid with our clients, and then also personally. Have you you've used hydrochloric acid on yourselves, right? Yeah. Oh, right, Amanda, you're like a true believer, or you were. I don't know about now.
Yeah.
Same. I've used it. And then we're going to go into the research and then give you our takeaway. And we are going to do it in an hour. I have faith in us
we can do
that
it.
This is going to happen.
Before we jump in, can I say something really quick to the listeners? So if y'all listen to the Brian Johnson episode, for those of you who do the pay subscriber option, I don't know if everybody saw it on his social medias, but he now has come out and said he is starting a religion. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yes.
So called it.
Yeah, you did. You sent me that.
Yeah. Anyways, that's all. Just wanted to insert that.
You know what? Wait, I have another update about him. I'm glad you said that, because we had somebody message us on Instagram to be like, where are the certificate of analysis for his supplements? Because that was my like hook for him. I was like, he's got COAs from third-party labs published for every one of the products that he sells. And this guy messaged me and he was like, no, he doesn't. I can't find them. And sure as shit, I went back to his website and they were gone. Yeah.
I wonder why.
I don't know. They were pretty current. Though I didn't look at every single one, but like the few that I looked at were from January of 2024. So just a couple months ago.
That's strange.
Or I'm sorry, December of 2024. Excuse me. Yeah. So like right at the end of 2024.
Interesting. Okay.
Anyway, I don't know. But yeah, you're right. If he's going to start a religion, you better have the COAs to back it up. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, let's talk about hydrochloric acid.
Well, Amanda, or before we get started, is there anything you want to say about the topic, and then we can dive into the history?
Oh, no. Well, I'm just going to follow along with you guys and chime in where I can't help it. So I'll just let you lead on it. I've got some notes going back here on things I want to make sure to get to, but why don't you kick us off?
Cool. Okay, so could not find anything on the history of supplementation. That would be really interesting to look at. The earliest paper that I could find actually was from 1898. So over 100 years ago, this guy, Boardman Reed, MD, published this paper, The Place of Hydrochloric Acid in the Treatment of Diseases of the Stomach. So maybe that does count as history of supplementation.
Yeah.
Give
That's
myself a little credit. This is published in JAMA. I could not get the full text. I actually looked on Sci-Hub. I don't know if we ever talked about Sci-Hub on this podcast. Fuck it.
Yeah.
We might as well.
It's amazing.
So Sci-Hub dot pick your day. It
Yeah.
moves around all the time, but Sci-Hub, it's SCI-HUB. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's an illegal service. I cannot remember the woman's name. Radiolab actually did an incredible episode on her and on Sci-Hub. She hacked all of these different publication companies that publish journal articles, and she published all of the articles open source on this website. So many times, if you're trying to find the full text of a paper, you can go to Sci-Hub and get the full text.
It's an amazing resource. What a badass. I mean, I didn't realize the millions and millions and millions of dollars that journal publications make. Because if you want, unless you're affiliated with a university and you have access to scientific journals, you have to pay. Or if you just want an article, you have to pay like $75 or whatever to see the full text. So what she did is she's like, no, this should be available to everybody. I fully agree.
Yeah, their tagline is the first pirate website in the world to provide mass and public access to tens of millions of research papers. And there are close to 85 million research papers on that database now. It's one woman, by the way.
It's amazing.
It's wild. But this particular paper, it's sometimes if it's really obscure or it's really old or really new, it's not on Sci-Hub. But yeah, so this paper, this doctor, he says the time has come for a definite and precise statement of what hydrochloric acid can do in the treatment of stomach diseases, when it is useful, as well as how it can be harmful, which is just an interesting, like he's taking into account both. So that was the first account. The first discovery of our endogenous hydrochloric acid. This is just interesting. I mean, maybe some people don't know. Your body creates hydrochloric acid that is primarily located in the bag that is your stomach. That's a pretty wild thing to think about if you understand hydrochloric acid. Can I tell like a 3-minute story about hydrochloric acid outside of the body?
Sure.
Andrew, my husband, and I meet years and years ago, and he had a job working in this like a facility, like a storage facility in South Jersey, where they stored like all kinds of different like chemical and mechanical products. And he drove a forklift. So there was this one area where it was this like, kind of a secure area that he had clearance to get into to pick up deliveries. And they had the really like noxious chemicals stored there. And one of those chemicals was hydrochloric acid. So, he's whatever, like 17 years old and like more concerned with like eating his 6 protein rich meals a day and going to the gym than probably anything. Although he's been a very I'm proud of him for his attention to detail for all these years. But he backed up with that forklift and the spiky forks were on the back, and he punctured a 50-gallon barrel of hydrochloric acid in this area. And he said he saw it come out of the barrel, and he heard it sizzle when it hit the concrete floor. And then alarms started going off. So they had to close down, this whole area of the facility. Everybody had to go home for the day. My point is, this is an incredibly acidic. It's on the pH scale. One of you might be able to make that, metric would be more accurate with that metric. It's so acidic. It would burn through almost any material. And when he would hit it with a forklift, right, it was a big deal. Your body makes it. That is how your stomach breaks down the food that it holds. So it has this mechanical action of pulsating, and then these cells in your stomach release hydrochloric acid. That same substance that he hit with his forklift, okay, you make that, your body. And the first person to discover that was this woman, Mabel Purefoy Fitzgerald. And so there's this awesome paper from 2021 called Getting Lost in History, Mabel Purefoy Fitzgerald and the Origins of Hydrochloric Acid in the Gastric Mucosa. There's this really great picture of her. Amanda, I sent it to her, and Amanda was like, wow, look at that desk, so much going on, and there's no computer. Yeah, because, it was 1902 is when this photo was taken. And as many people were at the time, but especially women, her discovery and work around hydrochloric acid and around just biochemistry generally was kind of lost. Mm-hmm. And other people were giving credit for her work. So kind of neat to see this is where it came from. She had this discovery, and this paper describes her full work and how she got there. So we can link that in the show notes. Just kind of an interesting start. I guess, she discovered it inside us. That was 1902 is when this photo was taken. Maybe she, had discovered it beforehand, but then we do have this paper from 1898 showing that they're using it exogenously for stomach diseases. So
that's super
little
interesting.
History there.
It is a pH of 1 typically, right. And the pH, that scale goes from 0 to 14, right? So 0, like 14 is base, like very like alkaline, and then the lower pH, like stomach acid, is super acidic. So it's really like one of the most acidic things. I don't really know other chemicals to compare it to, but I'm sure there's something where someone would go like, oh yeah, we know that's super acidic and dangerous. You would never touch it with your bare hands, obviously. And so
battery acid,
yeah. So but it has such an important,
there's other acids. I mean,
it's so important for your digestive function, because that acid has a role in helping you digest and break down the food that's in your stomach, and then also protecting you. It's a form of protection against any pathogens you're accidentally ingesting, on your lettuce from the salad bar or your hamburger or whatever. If someone didn't wash their hands in the kitchen, and like we actually ingest probably a lot more things than we realize. It doesn't always make us sick, and your stomach acid is one of your first protective kind of walls to prevent you from becoming ill. So to kill any microbes that are bad that, you're accidentally ingesting.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that whole, we'll talk more about solubilizing minerals, but the activation of pepsin in the stomach too, which is that protein breaking enzyme that that really is not active until it gets mixed with the hydrochloric acid and hits that really acidic pH, which is the body's brilliant way of being able to produce a protein degrading enzyme without that enzyme breaking down the tissues of that cell itself or the cells within the stomach lining. So it's like you're getting all that hydrochloric acid out into the lumen of the stomach. It's mixing with the pepsin. They're getting activated in the lumen, but then you have that buffer of the gastric mucosa that's, once these things are activated, it's in a space where you have protection now, right? So it's really such a cool design.
It's so cool.
Yeah, like it's good to know that if that process was not contained, the byproduct of that basically the proteins getting activated to digest, to becoming proteolytic, it would digest you.
Yeah.
You would break down the human cells that make you up.
Yeah.
Obviously the body evolved so that didn't happen, but when you learn about it, it's wild to think about.
Degree to which the body compartmentalizes pH to serve different functions and different fluids in different areas is really amazing. It's like really at the heart of biochem and how we survive and do what we do.
Should I read just like the brief A&P of how hydrochloric acid works? Do you think that this would be a good time to do that?
Sure.
I wrote it, so.
Yeah.
If something is wrong, you got to come to me with it. Okay, so it's the first occurrence of chemical digestion. Although I say that, I'm like, I think I'm wrong even there.
No, the mouth is the first.
Right.
Yeah, there's saliva. But maybe a different type of chemical digestion. I don't know.
We've got like all of our salivary amylases and lingual lipases.
All right, past Victoria. That's totally wrong. Okay, so let's be on the lookout to see if I was wrong with the rest of it. So, although I do say, though a small amount of chemical digestion from alpha amylase and lingual lipase does occur in the mouth, which I think when I was like first studying nutrition, they were like, no lipid digestion occurs in the mouth. And it's like, yeah, it does. There's some lingual lipase. Okay, so maybe my past self wasn't as stupid as I thought. That's in our saliva released from the parotid, submandibular, and sublingual glands, which, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and read this. Those glands are controlled by the balance of parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. And that's a good, just kind of like knowing for anyone that there is this dance always that's happening with the two branches of our autonomic nervous system. If we're always wound up or we're always too relaxed, there are many functions in the body that will not work how they're supposed to because they rely on this really nice kind of like flow back and forth. Okay, so chewing our food, some stuff happens in the mouth. But once we chew it, the food is now called a bolus. It's mechanically mixed in the stomach with gastric juice and enzymes by circular, longitudinal, and oblique smooth muscles that have nothing to do with our six pack. This is just the organ that is our stomach. Gastric juice is produced by three different gastric glands: the cardiac glands, the oxyntic glands, and the pyloric glands. Further, these glands contain different combinations of cells that contribute to the mix of gastric juice. Neck or mucus cells, parietal or oxynetic cells, chief or peptic zymogenic cells, and enteroendocrine cells. Wow, I was such a dork. Okay. The main constituents of gastric juice produced by these structures contains water. This is interesting. So this is what is in our stomach: water, electrolytes, hydrochloric acid, enzymes, mucus, and intrinsic factor necessary to absorb vitamin B12. Parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid at a concentration of about 160 micromoles per liter. It would be interesting to get a practical measurement of how much that actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Creating a pH that has been reported to be in a range from 0.8 to 3 on the pH scale. Hydrochloric acid converts the zymogen pepsinogen to its active enzyme form of pepsin. Amanda, that's what you were saying. Denatures proteins in order to prepare them for breakdown by pepsin, releases nutrients from the bolus, and acts as a bactericide. Multiple studies point out the microbe digesting killing effect of stomach acid in combination with pepsin.
And I would just add to that, and I think this is related to why there's so much anecdotal and clinical testimonial or theory out there that it helps with reflux to increase hydrochloric acid, which is the signaling role that it can play, because there's a lot of different types of receptors in the stomach that are communicating up to the lower esophageal sphincter, which is sitting right there on top of the stomach between the esophagus and the body of the stomach, and it's tightening to prevent reflux. And I think it gets its signal in part to close by the acidification of the stomach, and in addition to things like stretch receptors and stuff like that too. But I think that signaling piece is also important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've never thought, that might be where part of the idea came from, is that it signals to the lower esophageal valve to constrict. I've never even thought about that once.
So I want to say for listeners, if you're like kind of confused of what we're alluding to, I don't know if we said directly that in the holistic and naturopathic and functional medicine space, using hydrochloric acid as a supplement is commonly recommended for people who have acid reflux, who have GERD, who have any kind of digestive problems. And like you said, it's usually in a formulation, like a digestion support formulation, but then also recommended to take by itself sometimes. And it's usually, from what I remember, y'all correct me, you would do it as a titer test for yourself. So you would take a certain amount until you start to feel burning in your stomach, which sounds crazy.
Which is actually burning in your esophagus.
How acidic it is. So you do that at home, and then once you feel the burning, you scale it back a little bit, and then that's your dose.
But I mean, we love nothing more than that kind of thing. It's great. I get to use myself as an experiment and go home and figure this out.
It was the highlight of my life at that time. Amanda, your face, if people are not watching, I don't know if I've ever seen you laugh that hard. So
it's just so funny to hear some of these things said out loud.
Yeah.
And
this is the crux of the influenced piece, right, of this topic, is that it is so widely promoted by influencers that don't ever really do much of a literature review or fact checking of do we know that? How do we know? Do we know if people are really, low in stomach acid? Do we really, what's the research surrounding this practice? And so, I mean,
I think what happens is, because it's kind of taught as and I'm saying this is not true, but I'm saying what is kind of regurgitated in those spaces is that, I don't know, that's the second time on the podcast I'll ever make a joke. I think our first episode I made a joke.
Yes.
I was really proud of it.
I can't remember what it was, but 10 out of 10, Hannah.
But it's that the leading cause of GERD or acid reflux is hypochlorhydria or low stomach acid. And so that's kind of said over and over again. And so then it kind of leads to this natural conclusion of I'm having reflux, or I've been having GERD for a long time. I have low stomach acid. That's what it is. And I just need to take this. And that's all it is. Of course, it's a simple solution, but that's not you really backed up by much at all, as far as I know. But I know anecdotally, people do have success with
And
it.
it's not just reflux, it's bloating, it's delayed gastric emptying, it's motility disorders, it's biliary stasis, you know, all of it you can find people recommending hydrochloric acid for all of it.
Mm-hmm.
The same, again, just to reiterate, the same substance that Andrew hit with his forklift one fateful day in South Jersey. Yeah. Yeah.
Regardless of like the evidence, it just by its nature of being an extremely caustic substance really should warrant a lot of caveats. You know, if anybody's recommending it, it should be followed by a long list of caveats and notes, tips around using it.
So just out of curiosity, when you all did the titer test on yourselves, and again, just to clarify to people, protocols that I've seen in, you know, more holistic nutrition, they say you take home the hydrochloric acid, you get it from wherever, and you take one with food. If you don't feel burning, the next meal, take 2. So let's say like one tablet is maybe like 100 milligrams or 50 milligrams. If you don't feel burning with 2, then you take 3, then you take 4 until you feel the burning sensation. And then you go down 1 tablet. You know, you go down 1 dose, and then that's your holding dose. With each meal, you take whatever that would be, 500 milligrams, 600 milligrams, a gram, until you start to feel burning at that dose. And then you slowly lower down until you don't need hydrochloric acid with your meals anymore. So the assumption is actually twofold. 1, that low hydrochloric acid is the problem. And 2, that taking the hydrochloric acid will somehow like alert your body that it needs to start making more, and that you will eventually be able to titer down and come off of it permanently and then still maintain this optimized digestive function that you've created. I'm curious, when you all went through that protocol, how high did you go? How many milligrams?
You know, and this is on social media, where these things are not preceded by dozens of caveats. This is called the HCL challenge. I think it's pretty much what it goes by.
Yeah. It's still out there too. Like this still happens pretty frequently, I think, in some places.
I don't remember, and I don't know if this was popularized first by Jonathan Wright in the book Why Stomach Acid is Good for You. I think it may have been. I don't remember how high I got. I know that it was pretty high for a while, but I did actually have a miraculous experience with supplementing hydrochloric acid. I had been through a car wreck and I had gotten a hiatal hernia through it, where my stomach sac basically pushed up through my diaphragm into my thoracic cavity a little bit. And I had a lot of digestive complications after the car wreck and developed silent reflux where I was losing my voice. So this was a huge on-ramp for me into nutrition, because at the time I was a musician and thought that was, I was going to be a singer-songwriter forever. But then I started losing my voice to silent reflux, meaning I wasn't feeling a lot of heartburn, but it was still coming into my throat and eroding my vocal cords and irritating all those tissues. So I did the challenge. I took it for several months and then weaned off, and it really, really, yeah, there you go, hiatal hernia. It really did. It like. So in my N=1 experiment, and who knows, maybe I was already going to be returning to the mean of like feeling better anyway, but it definitely did seem to kind of just kickstart my digestive system that was really, really sluggish and kind of wrecked from this wreck that I was in. But I was able to wean off without ever having any adverse signs or symptoms or weird warming sensations or worsening of the reflux. My symptoms were improved, and then I got off of it and don't take it anymore. But I know that's not everybody's experience. And I know that there were so many people were doing this at the time. And I remember somebody saying that you would have to get up to like around 11,000 milligrams to get, an equivalent to what a healthy adult human stomach would produce. I don't know if that y'all remember that, which at the time I didn't know about fact checking.
That's 11 grams, by the way. I mean, that's a
huge amount.
Yeah.
It's like
enormous. It'd be like taking a handful of these caps every meal. It's crazy. But that message really normalized the idea that I might be taking like 6 of these capsules with every meal, because the threshold of healthy or normal would have been, way up high. So did you do you remember how you got?
Mine wasn't. I think I took, and the only reason I actually took it was because I had heartburn for the very first time. I had never had it before. And this was actually when I was doing my first nutrition training ever. And I thought, okay, I'll try this and see if this helps. And I think maybe like 2 capsules, and I felt like a significant, like warm burning sensation. And so it was a very little amount. And I think I took it for like a little bit, maybe like a week or a month or something. And just because I thought, oh God, I don't want to have like acid reflux all the time. So I'm going to take this. And then after that, I never had it. So I don't even know if it actually helped or if it was just a one occurrence after a meal, because as we'll talk about, there's like many things that can contribute to isolated incidents of reflux, as opposed to like having it chronically, for a really long time. And so, yeah, that's my experience.
Yeah, I feel like you all are like the smartest, most balanced women, and I'm just this like wild animal that I would like literally go into the kitchen, and I can remember this product. I think it's like 500 milligrams of hydrochloric acid was in one capsule. I would just pour them out into my hand, and then just like 8,000, 9,000 milligrams. I was taking so many. I was like, I'm just digesting so hard, bro. That's and I did have acid reflux, and we can go into the reasons why that can happen. For me, it was because I'm pretty sure this is the reason why I'm incredibly hypermobile. Some people are even very skeptical of that as being an underlying contributor to acid reflux, but it runs in my family on the side that the hypermobility is on. Like my 75-year-old grandmother could still put her leg behind her head. Wildly hypermobile people. So yeah, I don't need to belabor it, but I was, my personality was what it was with hydrochloric acid, just like it was with everything else. Like if it's a little bit is good, a lot is better. Hopefully it didn't do harm. I do remember reading in Harry Eidner's blood chemistry workbook. I don't know if you ever took a blood chemistry course with him. He was like, the reason that we have functional blood chemistry was the senior Harry Eidner. He had this huge manual that you would get with the course, and he cautioned against taking hydrochloric acid long term because he was like, it could disturb the pH balance system wide. And I remember reading that, and I was like, he has no idea what he's. This man who's an engineer and an MD, like, whatever. I've got my nutrition certificate, bro.
So that's what I'm curious about. Like, what harm can be done from taking it? Because it isn't something, as far as I know, there aren't any trials or anything dosing people with this, looking at like what's happening inside of their stomach when they're taking these high doses of hydrochloric acid, and are there long-term effects or like a bounce back effect, or, what's going on there? I'm so curious. Like, Amanda, have you seen any like damage in your clients from people taking it? Or
so I've always been I've recommended it to many people because I kind of started my nutritional therapy work with people with acid reflux who were on PPIs and were trying to get off of PPIs, and working in conjunction with a physician. But some of those people did try hydrochloric acid, but I was always very conservative with my approach to it. So I never, fortunately, sent anybody to the hospital with acute gastritis, but that happens for sure. And I personally know of a handful of people. I have been adjacent to several cases of severe acute gastritis, ER type of gastritis after taking, too much hydrochloric acid. And if you go, so I can't find any like studies on like case study reports or anything like that on acute gastritis from hydrochloric acid overdose. But if you go to Reddit, you will see the stories that are what I've heard of too, which is, basically like they can't eat for weeks, kind of like it can be really severe for some people who, and who knows like why some people react that way versus others. Their they already have a lot of like erosion of the mucosal membranes. Maybe there's a peptic ulcer. Maybe there's already tissue changes in the esophagus. So there's that. So it's more anecdotal, but I did, the studies in terms of like looking, there's kind of two questions. One is, how common is hypochlorhydria outside of known conditions like autoimmune gastritis, where the parietal cells are damaged over time, or outside of conditions like H. pylori, which will eventually, H. pylori infection, the initial response is increased hydrochloric acid production as part of that immune response. But then over time, the H. pylori can kind of override that through damage and irritation to those parietal cells, but also the H. pylori creates bicarbonate, which is like a buffer. So it does create a more alkaline stomach environment. So, but outside of those conditions, in healthy individuals that don't have any conditions related to like pathology of the stomach or parietal cells, there's a paucity, is that the word I'm looking for?
Paucity of evidence.
Yeah, and it's really disappointing that there's not more research into this, but the research that I have read is like, it's really not that common in these studies. They're small studies though. I mean, some of the studies I found are like 6 participants, where most of the research around this is actually looking at, can we use hydrochloric acid during meals for people who are taking proton pump inhibitors or acid blocking medications, acid reducing medications, for the purpose of increasing absorption of pharmaceutical medications that require more acid in the stomach to be absorbed. And so in those studies, one of the main ones was looking at, I forget, this was a small study, looking at taking 150 milligrams of betaine hydrochloric acid with water on an empty stomach. And it dropped the stomach pH down to below 1, like 0.6 to 0.8, which is very acidic, within 15 to 30 minutes. But then their stomach's kind of rebounded back up to a more alkaline state within like a little over an hour. But that's on an empty stomach. So, but that's 15, that would be 2 capsules of what you would typically find. A lot of capsules are either 500 or 700. So you're looking at between 2 or 3 capsules that is dropping the stomach to an extremely acidic pH without
food. 1505 milligrams of betaine hydrochloride.
1500 milligrams.
Got it.
Yeah. So the thing is that one was on an empty stomach. So those same researchers then looked at what if we add that to create a model where we add an actual meal where, I think it was like a egg sandwich and yogurt or something like that. They found that they had to increase the dose to 4,500 milligrams to reach that around 1, a pH of 1 within 30 minutes, which was their goal for the absorption of these medications, because the medications need to be taken with food. So they couldn't just give them the acid and the medication, because that it would cause other gastric problems. So, that was interesting. So the person first is taking the proton pump inhibitor to block hydrochloric acid production. Then they're given a meal along with 4,500 milligrams, and it's able to drop the pH or make it acidic enough to absorb that medication within about 30 minutes. But those studies are 1,500 milligrams is a huge dose. I mean, that would be kind of like the handful, Victoria. I mean, that's, maybe
just intuited that
9 capsules.
It's so many.
But they're like, well, it was temporarily well tolerated, but that's in people who are on proton pump inhibitors. So their stomach is generally going to not be having a lot of acidity anyway. So you're just dropping it with the meal. And the interesting thing about that is that in the nutrition world, we all tend to say that taking HCl supplementation is contraindicated for somebody who's taking PPIs or acid blockers, right?
Right.
But that's actually the group that it's studied in. Is the group that it actually makes the most sense in. I mean,
and did they have symptoms? Like, did they have the symptoms that were related to the reason they were taking the PPI in the
They
first
didn't
place?
they didn't talk a lot about other just kind of functional gastric issues that can come with PPIs. But no, it was saying that it was well tolerated. But these studies were really short and in a very small groups of people. So what that looks like long term is, the primary outcome was the absorption of the pharmaceutical medication in the bloodstream. That's the main thing that was being measured. So what does that do over the long term to, other parts of the digestive system? And, importantly, we can't necessarily apply that to somebody who's not on a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, or an acid blocking medication. But it's interesting because if you look in these studies, some of them are the kind of in the background sections of the studies, they're talking about how before hydrochloric acid was widely available as a supplement, they had tried using Coca-Cola as an agent, as a acidifying agent. Yeah, we're like, well, maybe we can just have these people drink a Coke with their meals and then they'll be able to absorb their medications. But there's obvious downsides to that. And it wasn't really quite acidic enough. I think it's got a pH of like 2 or something, and you'd have to consume quite a lot.
That's funny. I remember where I grew up in Tennessee, like there was, I don't know if this was true. I mean, Coca-Cola is from our town in Chattanooga.
No way.
Coca-Cola family lives here. But the joke may be based in truth that like spills on the highway, if it needed to be cleaned, they just dumped Coke on it because it was so acidic. It would clean off whatever gunk was on there.
I mean, we were always told if you had to clean your toilet real good, just to let a can of Coke sit in it overnight and then clean it the next morning. Y'all never did that?
No.
Actually, when we like will leave our house sometimes, for a couple months at a time because we split our time between places. First thing, my mom was like, "Well, just pour a can of Coke.
Just let it sit."
We do straight vinegar, white vinegar, but we never did the Coca-Cola, but maybe we'll try it. I mean, what this dovetails into is another kind of is it true or is it not idea in the natural health world where you're supposed to drink lemon water to support digestion. And the reality is probably similar to, the, like you're saying, like they're like, should they just drink Coca-Cola in lieu of hydrochloric acid? The acidity of lemon is nowhere near what the acidity of hydrochloric acid is. So it might be good for you to drink lemon water, but it's probably not the mechanism that you think it is to aid in digestion.
Yeah. And another study that I saw was looking at supplementation in healthy individuals. This one, it was actually, this was just a pH study, and it was looking not at supplementing with hydrochloric acid, but at just general kind of pH levels in different ages in healthy individuals. And they saw that, typically most of the people had similar fasting pH levels, which were in the, like normal acidic range, but somewhere around 2 or 1.5, somewhere in there. But what they did see is that as people aged, and especially like over 60, I forget what the age group was, it would take them a lot longer to reacidify the stomach after consuming a meal, because our meal is, our food is going to be filled with all these buffering agents like calcium and different minerals and
calcium.
So that takes, there's going to be kind of a curve in terms of how quickly you're able to then produce the acid, drop the pH to be able to solubilize the different minerals and break down the proteins and activate the pepsin and all this stuff. And that is an issue for some people, where it may not be that you just have consistently low stomach acid, but as you age, or maybe it's while you're sick or you're fatigued or whatever, then it takes longer for your body to get back to that baseline. And so that can slow down digestion in the upper GI tract. I think that's a thing.
And that is a known factor in reflux and bloating and other, like indigestion, is motility, gastrointestinal motility. So your stomach emptying is slowed, like for whatever reason. And so that's why if you went to a physician and they gave you, you have GERD, they give you a sheet of foods to avoid for GERD, it's going to include fatty foods because that slows digestion. It's going to include also, I guess we haven't hit on it yet, but like the lower esophageal sphincter, there's certain foods that can cause it to relax, even like herbs and like healthy foods, that you think are good for you. And you may notice like, oh, after I eat this one thing, I always have heartburn or I always have indigestion. Why is that? It's probably because that component in the food is affecting that environment in some way. It's either causing that muscle to relax, the sphincter that separates your stomach from your esophagus, so it allows things to go back up when they shouldn't be there, you know, or it's slowing your digestion so much that everything's kind of sitting in your stomach too long.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a good time to kind of go into like, well, if low hydrochloric acid is not, you know, this super prevalent problem that lots and lots of people suffer with, that might not be underlying heartburn or bloating or these other issues that we've kind of attributed it to. What is the problem? Hannah, I know, you know, you just touched on that, but I think in many nutrition circles and in natural health generally, the story has been repeated so many times about hydrochloric acid. It is one of those tropes that we just kind of take for truth.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we're trying to figure out, well, what is actually going on?
Yeah. When I sorry.
I was just going to say too that, you know, I think it's a really important area of clinical exploration and questioning because so I'm going to read us the statistic. It's estimated that in the United States, PIs have been the preferred treatment for greater than 50% of digestive disorders. So they're kind of like, you know, the antibiotics of the digestive system. They just get thrown at people, right? Which amounts to more than an $11 billion annual business and results in acid reducing medications being the most widely prescribed medications in North America. Wow. So these are over the counter, and the long-term implications, you know, they're I think I can't swear on this, but I'm pretty sure that they were only cleared by the FDA for short-term use. So that's you know,
correct.
What is it?
That is
like 20 days or less or something.
Yes.
So people are out there taking them long term, and that comes with increased risk for dementia, increased risk for osteoporosis. I mean, the list on, because you can get reduced absorption of not just B12 but folate, all sorts of different B vitamins and iron and zinc and calcium. So there's a big sequelae that can come from long term use, and that. So I think it's to be experimenting with everything we can to say, and we kind of, what can we do to reduce the need for these medications and kickstart somebody's digestion.
It's so interesting though. It's like, God, we're always going to come back here in this podcast where it's like, there is caveat to everything that we speak to. And so I feel like I've been here in other episodes as well. When we're talking about interventions, we went from this one intervention in the conventional world. We sort of like skipped over to, you know, our answer to it in the natural world. I don't even know what word to use anymore. Natural, integrative, functional, holistic, whatever the hell we are over here. And it comes with its own set of issues that people don't really talk about. You know, we're just like, PPI is bad, HCl good. That's it. And it's like, the reality is that PPI are absolutely needed in some circumstances. If people have precancerous cells in their esophagus and they need to get that acid tamped down, it seems like there are very good clinical scenarios when appropriately used, PPIs are absolutely needed, and likely hydrochloric acid as well. It's just that level of detail isn't taught, or I was not taught it, or cannot find much information on it. Amanda, like you're saying, there are not many studies that give us answers.
It's wild that so many people are prescribed PPIs because they have those symptoms. Like, it's like, why do so many people have those digestive problems, you know? And then you were like, oh, okay, well, let's look at the foundational causes of like acid reflux and GERD. Like one is like circadian dysfunction, like poor sleep. Being exposed to, you know, blue light from your phone and TV, like late into the night, like shift work.
Melatonin is a huge
low melatonin, obesity, especially in the abdominal area, because it increases pressure, poor diet, dysbiosis in your gut, you know, you got stress, like all of these things. And you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense that many people would have reflux or like GERD symptoms, because
dehydration, hiatal hernia, which is structural, like Amanda, what you experienced. It's like, there can be so many reasons. And so Hannah, I know that this is like a passion area for you also. It's like, do you want to speak to like GERD and heartburn specifically, to what likely is leading to that for most people?
What I know based on what I've read and working with with clients, and very much influenced by Dr. Jason Hawrelak, who's a microbiome researcher, is that one of the main causes for a lot of people is that lower esophageal sphincter is just not working like it should. So it's supposed to separate your stomach contents from your esophagus, primarily to keep that acid down, because like Amanda said, your stomach has that really great mucosal layer that protects the stomach tissues from that acid, but your esophagus doesn't. And so as soon as it goes backwards into the esophagus, you're going to feel it. And that's why it can be extremely painful for some people if you're symptomatic. And then that combined with maybe slow stomach emptying, which can be caused by a lot of things. What I've found is that like if you can address that sphincter and like strengthen it, then that really helps reflux stop. I mean, obviously that's like not the case for every single person, but I think it's really worth looking into if someone is like, well, I have heartburn sometimes and like I'm like bloated and, you know, my stomach digestion probably needs help. Should I take this hydrochloric acid? And it's like, well, first let's look at these other things, like actual things that might be the reason why it's happening. Yeah, here's a great, so that LES, lower esophageal sphincter.
Is right here. Yeah. And then when it weakens, I mean, this is such a great illustration. You can see it's like there is a greater chance of the contents of the stomach coming up into the esophagus. And so when we talk about pH in this episode, this area below the lower esophageal sphincter often sits at a very, very low pH. The pH of this area above the lower esophageal sphincter, LES, is how we shorten it a lot of the times. The pH is, I want to say, what it's like just mid-range, like 7.2. It's like the tissues of this are alkaline or right in between. And so it can't handle the acid burden that the stomach can. So just to give people a visual of this.
Yeah. And that's something that is like backed up by the science, is that like that dysfunction happens on a lot of people who have GERD. And it's worth noting that like a lot of like I mentioned before, the food list that you might get, a lot of those foods are foods that can cause that muscle to relax. Just having a relaxing effect on the muscle, like caffeine, alcohol, I think like peppermint, spicy food. And so that's why some people might only get indigestion or heartburn when they eat those foods. Another thing I learned from Dr. Hawrelak is that fructooligosaccharides can affect some people.
Interesting.
So foods like asparagus, that was when I had a client, and asparagus was what gave them heartburn like every single time, you know.
And I wonder if that's intra-abdominal pressure from fermentation, if that's like related to SIBO, or is that just for everybody? Because I know FOS is kind of it's not a great prebiotic for anybody with SIBO because it's,
I mean, right, kind of remember the line where it's like everybody bloats, but only some people have symptoms from it, you know? So it's like some people feel hypersensitive in their stomach, or some people might have, you know, the pressure build. When we say intra-abdominal pressure, like the pressure builds in the abdomen, and that pressure physically pushes up on the sphincter, and it kind of wants to make it open, sort of like air coming out of a balloon. Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I think it's what you're saying is like really an important part of any framework, which is start with looking at the potential contributing factors rather than it always being about adding some new supplement or nutrient or whatever it is. Like start there. What are you doing that could be promoting this?
Or a high fat diet. I mean, I think about the implications for people who eat a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, and they are just having heartburn all the time. It's like, fat relaxes that sphincter.
Slow gastric emptying. And then also floats to the top of the stomach. So you're more likely to actually sense like, oh, that's fat. That's
and it also alters your microbiome. So then, you know, that could cause a bloom of bacteria that are producing certain gases and things. And then that could cause, I mean, there's so many factors. It's incredible to think about like all these factors, but I guess it is just easier to take like a supplement, right? I mean, that's why people want to do it, because it's fun. And especially like and I'm not advocating for that. I just think it's really interesting that like, you know, doing your challenge, the HCL challenge sounds like exciting. And you're like, oh, I'm going to do my challenge and figure out what works for me best. And
we should create the lower esophageal sphincter challenge.
We should.
No kidding. And even if there is a legitimate like collection of signs and symptoms that suggest kind of a low fire in the stomach. There's other ways to go about promoting appropriate levels of stomach acid production if you're convinced it's compromised, rather than just adding hydrochloric acid. First, I think, is lowering inflammation. If there's, if you have signs of inflammation in the upper GI tract, whether that's something like a antioxidant like melatonin, or mucogenic herbs that have mucin that can add to our protective gastric mucus layer, okra and aloe vera and slippery elm and all that stuff, to lower the inflammation and let those cells do their job better. But then there's also bitters that are also anti-inflammatories,
oh my God, any bitter, radicchio,
leafy greens and ginger. Yeah. And then there's the whole cofactor thing. I think we mentioned before that zinc is the mineral cofactor for carbonic anhydrase, which is the enzyme that is required for hydrochloric acid production in the parietal cells. So there's a big framework that you can approach the issue through, like long before you get to taking hydrochloric acid.
Amanda, what did that paper say? There's like this one hinge paper. I think I texted you today and I was like, is this the paper that you found? And you were like, yes, this is the one. That's kind of like one of the only ones that's like, what is the effect of supplementing with hydrochloric acid?
What's
that right?
The evidence? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it talks about that, a big part of it is just that for senior citizens, they have a delayed return to baseline pH after a meal.
Okay, and it's that paper that you discussed where it shows the age.
Yeah. So the mealtime supplementation with betaine hydrochloric acid for functional hypochlorhydria. What's the evidence? It's fairly old now. It's like from 2013, I think, or 11.
Okay.
But some of the articles that he cited, the researchers have since done some follow-up papers, but it's really interesting because this paper actually shows at the end of it a basic protocol for using betaine hydrochloric acid, and it's the HCl challenge.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah. And it calls for a maximum of 300 milligrams of betaine hydrochloric acid.
Not 8,000 milligrams?
No, not 8,000. So 3,000. That's still a really hefty dose and could certainly be problematic for a lot of people. So I was a little bit surprised that the authors felt comfortable.
Yeah, that is surprising to me.
With that. And there's all these ideas about like, how can you know? Well, you can drink some baking soda water, and if you don't burp a lot, what is a lot, I don't know, if you don't burp a lot, that's a sign that you have hypochlorhydria. And I'm like, is it though? Because I mean, it could also be a sign that your LES is actually working really well and you're not
right.
Who is measuring how much burping we're talking about? That's just not a standardized test by any means. Unfortunately, we don't have I wish that we could just mail order Heidelberg tests to ourselves.
Right. Okay. Talk about that, Amanda. That's important.
But it's just, I think I don't know that much about the impedance tests that are used in gastroenterology practice to measure pH. I'd have to go back and look at what the difference between that and a Heidelberg test is. But a Heidelberg test is just a capsule that you can swallow, and I think
there's a string attached, right?
Yeah. And I don't really remember how it's actually transmitting information, or if it is, but it's just a way to monitor your pH of your stomach. But there's one company that makes the Heidelberg tests, and very few clinics that offer them. So it's there's just a lot of we don't really know what's going on with people's stomach pH, and there is so much clinical and anecdotal evidence and so little scientific research evidence that it's just I just wish that there was a little bit more going on to try to make sense of the two, or of the three, of why do you see, because I think it's legitimate. I mean, for me, I really feel like it was super helpful, but right. I also don't find a whole lot of evidence in the literature to back my personal experience, and my clinical experience. So
yeah, I know, as I'm thinking about what the takeaway is, it's God, I haven't practiced clinically in so long, but I just think to myself, the conversations I've had with people, that have called in the past few years, who 9 out of 10 have digestive complaints. If I were to sit down with them, I just don't think in good faith I would recommend hydrochloric acid supplementation to them, knowing all of these points that we've talked about, like the stress, the fatty foods, the spicy foods. Like, I'm just like, take out alcohol first.
Right.
It's like for so many issues, bloating, constipation, diarrhea. I mean, heartburn is kind of at the top of the list, I think, for the reasons people recommend HCl, but there's so many other tools that we have that would only lead to a positive outcome, whether or not that outcome is related to digestion, that it's like, just use those for sure. And then get to somebody who does the Heidelberg testing if nothing else works, versus taking this supplement that we don't have great evidence to support. And there could be harm.
It's one of those things where the risk to benefit ratio is a little bit steep on the risk side.
Yeah.
I can share
God, we just passed a minute of an hour.
Oh, wow, we're on it. Can I share really quick what I would used to suggest? This is not like medical advice. It's just something I would see work for people a lot beyond addressing those foundations, like chewing your food really well, really like honing in on relaxing with meals, like, trying to notice your trigger foods and try to limit those, would be to supplement with melatonin at night.
Yes.
3 milligrams. It's what's studied and shown to be actually incredibly effective. There's only like 2 or 3 good studies on this, and they're older, but it's pretty cool. I think there's a protocol for one that was just published, so hopefully there'll be a new one coming out. And then trying the herbs that help to just protect your esophagus. So I would have people get either slippery elm or marshmallow root and make a slurry with it instead of taking a capsule. So like, if you get the slippery elm caps, you open it up, you put it in a cup, like 3 or 4 caps, put a little warm water, you can put honey if you want, and then you drink it.
Tastes
it gets nice and thick. It's like a how do you say mucilaginous herb?
Nobody on earth can say that word.
Yeah. And so
I say mucogenic.
Mucogenic, yeah.
Mucusy.
Yeah, mucusy
and
herb.
slimy.
And you want it to like coat your throat, and you can kind of feel it doing that. And so that I would have clients do that, especially if they got reflux at night.
Yeah. Laying on their left side.
Yeah.
Left side's a big one because it tips this opening of the stomach upward, so you're much less likely to reflux. And then the other thing too is that if you're primarily having nocturnal reflux, then taking an alkalinizing agent at bedtime makes sense, because then you're getting the protective benefit of the alkaline buffer overnight, but you're not interrupting digestion, because hopefully you've already had your meal a couple 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever, before you're taking it. So that's another one. And that's different than taking a proton pump inhibitor or H2 blocker. That is more of a longer term, shutting down the acid production. It's just a temporary alkalinization of the stomach. So it doesn't have some of the negative side effects that those other stronger medications do. So that's the sodium bicarbonate, maybe mixed in a little bit of water.
And then, tons of people have hiatal hernia. There's actually a video, I send it to everybody, this chiropractor on YouTube with the sweetest Southern accent, who shows you just this like quick test that you can do to see if you might have hiatal hernia. He's super humble, but he's like, try this test where essentially you like manually shift the stomach back down under the diaphragm.
Yeah.
And then he's like, if this helps and your heartburn decreases, go talk to your doctor. Like, this might be something that you need to get fixed, because it can absolutely lead to more than just heartburn. It can lead to digestive distress. I mean, part of me is like, I might have one. I pick up dumb, heavy shit all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't even talk about vagus nerve. There's a lot,
Yeah, there's so much.
Well, we're infamous for part 2s. You can come back, but I just want to encourage people. I mean, if you have been recommended to take HCl, if you're a clinician and it's something that you rely on, email us and, tell us about it. It's influencetodeath@gmail.com, or you can find us on Instagram at influencetodeath. We've gotten some awesome listener interactions lately. It's really cool to hear from you all. I'll just put out there, sometimes it takes me a minute to read the messages, or for Hannah to read the messages. So if we don't get back to you right away, it's just because we're just people, but we will get back to you.
And if you try it, it should make your symptoms better if it's good for you.
Right.
Not worse.
And
not
your
worse.
goal is not to max out your dose. Your goal is minimum effective dose.
Right. Take the minimum amount possible to get the positive effect that you're after.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to go harder if you have negative symptoms.
Victoria,
stop.
I'm talking to you.
I know. And then I do just want to say, I mean, more and more, I know I have a bias around this because I worked with Sarah for a long time and we studied hypermobility. But if you are somebody who's like super, super flexible and you have consistent digestive complaints, there might be a connection there. And it's not something that's talked about a lot. So if you hear it here, just know like you're not crazy. Those two things, there's a link. So, we can talk about that in the future more. Sweet. Anything else before we sign off?
I feel like we did it. We did it in an hour.
Yeah. Amanda, thank you so much for coming back and talking to us about this. I think this is an important episode.
It's
been on our list.
It's a really great topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's such a strong chance for doing harm, as you said. So it's a great one.
I had to check out those Reddit threads. I didn't even think to look there. I love getting information like that from Reddit because sometimes you just find a gold mine of like so many people and their experiences, and
it's a crowdsource.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay, we will see you all the next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.